Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about experience and being bad at code. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Fredrik, do software developers care if they're dealing with a senior developer who is bad at programming? And the short answer is yes. Nothing kills off respect for a software developer faster than being bad at the very least being perceived as being bad at coding. Let me explain. So you are, as I've stated before, the idea is that you are an expert. And that sucks. Sometimes it's pretty nice, but very often it also sucks. Because when you are perceived to be an expert, you are perceived as being someone who knows something, and the less the person knows about the thing that you know something about, the more they believe, or at the very least, the more they project onto you that you are special in some fashion. They project all of their own values on top of you, and depending on how naive that individual is, you might be built up to be some type of super individual who should do and be able to create pretty much everything. It's very similar to how some people who search for meaning in life project onto these celebrities or religious figures and so forth. Like they project them, they build them up until they're some type of godlike figure that they can worship, and then they get super disappointed when that celebrity cheats on his wife or her husband or whatever for the millionth time, and they act as if this is something that is unnatural or like there's a shock here. It's just the person, guys. It's just a human being. But the people who build them up to be more than that are creating a situation where there's an expectation that they should be more than that. And it's the same thing for you as a software developer. If you have if you have a seniority, if you have a certain amount of years, or if you have something that makes someone go, wow, this person kind of knows some stuff, it's very easy for you to get to a position where people believe that you know everything and that they can come to you for all intents and purposes. And that is a lot of pressure to hold. But at the same time, it's kind of inevitable that this will happen, because if you are a senior developer, the idea is, and this is very similar to just growing up, the idea is that if you have spent a certain amount of years in the industry, well, then you should know a lot of stuff. It's the same it's the reason why we don't accept childish or immature behavior from adults. We expect you at some point to reflect in your personality the years that you have lived. Same thing goes for software developers. So if you are a senior developer who can't really produce code, or you're not really good at that stuff, that is not going to earn you a lot of respect. The only people who are going to look at you as something worth their time, or someone worth their time, are people who don't know anything about software development. It's because since they know even less than you, they're not aware of where you should be in sometimes, depending on how bad you are actually, because it's actually feasible for you to be so bad at software development that it actually creates a situation where people who have no understanding of it start to question if you actually know what the hell you're doing. But for the people who actually do know what they're doing, they're going to see it very quickly, and it's not going to be pretty. It's not about impressing people necessarily, but it's about meeting some type of minimum requirement, if that makes sense. And this minimum requirement exists for absolutely everybody. It exists for the juniors as well. You have to, and it's a very unfair thing. It's something that doesn't make more sense than that there is a subjective understanding in the community that you find yourself in that decides where you should be. And usually it's dictated one part by the person who runs the company, and one part by the people, or at the very least the person who is in charge of the engineers, and one part your coworkers. That is mostly what's going to dictate how good or how bad you have to be in order to not be shamed, if that makes sense. And it's the same thing for any community. And that's why I keep saying to people that it's impossible to tell you how good you have to be, or what your market value is for me. I can't just tell you that, oh, if you know these and that, these tools, then you are this valuable, or you're this good, or you're exactly where you should be, because it depends on where you are. It's the same thing with picking languages. If you are a Java person, you might be really popular in one area where a person who knows PHP would not even be able to find a job, and vice versa. It all depends on where you are. And what a good choice in terms of languages is, if we're talking about for job purposes, well, that's going to differ from region to region as well. There are trends, but it always comes down to the details of the whole thing. And those details are impossible to know apart from you exposing yourself in an environment where you just kind of have to dive in and say, all right, this is what I know, and let's just see what everybody else knows. And then by looking at what everybody else knows, you kind of figure out where on the scale you are. So what I want you to take away from this is that people do care a lot if there's a disproportion between the time that you've spent in the industry and the skills that you have. There is an expectation on you that the further you work or the longer you work, the more skills you acquire. In other words, if you ever get to a point where you have the years in the industry to be called a senior, but you have the skills of a junior, that's going to be a big problem for you, because there's an expectation that you should continuously progress up until some very subjective point. And I would say that most, I think, expect you to be, if we're going to talk about the specific of that point, to be at a level where you understand all the requirements of a software developer. You understand how to talk to stakeholders and deal with how to structure up work and all of this stuff. You are stable in the sense that you pretty much are self-reliant. You can solve pretty much any problem that gets thrown at you alone. And lastly, you have the seniority to solve problems in a reasonable amount of time. You don't have to. You don't get to a point where they have to bring in outside help or something like that to solve the problem for you. You kind of figure it out. That's a rough idea of where you need to be in order to be called a senior developer. And that is subjective, I know. And if you can't reach that point, it's going to be a problem for you in general terms. The only time it's acceptable for you to be below that point as a senior developer is if you work in a company where they don't really understand, they don't really have the same definition for what a senior is as what, at least from my perspective, most of the industry has. Have a great day.